The use of these programs, by design, will decline as the financial system recovers. But we must remember that our economic recovery has just begun, and significant parts of the system remain impaired.
TARP Chief Herb Allison saying earlier today at a Senate Banking Committee hearing that the Treasury's financial assistance programs are not going away soon. Well, it has been a year since the Troubled Asset Relief Program was created, and many economists agree TARP has helped stabilize the economy. But there's similar consensus that the program has not been a slam dunk, including the chair of TARP's Congressional Oversight panel, who's been outspoken on how the government has handled the financial crisis.
Where's our money?
I don't know.
Yes, she even spoke with Michael Moore. Elizabeth Warren live now from Capitol Hill. Welcome.
Thank you.
Professor Warren, thanks again for joining us. First, your thoughts on your role, the appearance in Michael Moore's new movie.
Well, you know, I did a lot of interviews over the past several months. I thought when we undertook TARP that one of the critical things was to stop this business of people who said, oh, well, this is all just very complicated in futures and derivatives and so on, and none of you can understand it, and to say, no, this is actually some pretty basic stuff, some pretty understandable stuff, and I'm going to get out there and talk with anybody who wants to talk about it. And that's what I've been doing.
And you're continuing to talk about it with us today. Of course, we appreciate that. So TARP, as you know, scheduled to expire December 31st, but we still have not seen an increase in bank lending. Should then TARP be extended? Do you expect it will be?
Well, forgive me, but I'm going to give a kind of on the one hand, on the other analysis. Here's the problem we've got. Remember what brought us into TARP and caused us to put this money into TARP to begin with? We said we were really concerned about too big to fail, concentration in the banking industry. We now have too bigger to fail than we were a year ago. We have more concentration in the banking industry. You remember we talked about those toxic assets that were on the books of the banks? Those toxic assets are still on the books of the banks. No, we're not in the position we were in a year ago where it looked like we were peering over the abyss. Things have settled down. But we are concerned, our panel is concerned about the fundamental economic health of the financial institutions. The small banks are continuing to fail, and there are a lot of big banks that still seem to be in not progressing as we might have hoped. Now, the problem, of course, is whether or not TARP, in its current incarnation and how it goes forward, is really going to address those issues. So we think we see the problem. What we don't see right now is a solution for that problem.
What changes would you like to see to the TARP if it does indeed get extended?
Well, first of all, we really have to deal with the toxic assets on the books of the banks because that's what keeps the banks from lending. It works this way. When the banks have a lot of bad assets, money comes in from the government or from their own investors or revenues that they earn, and instead of taking that money and turning around and lending it to small businesses, to consumers, instead they have to hold on to it to try to offset the losses for these assets that they've got. It's like a hole in the bottom of the boat. Until we get that problem resolved, we're not going to see small business lending.
Do you think we'll see another wave of a crisis?
Well, let me put it this way. The things we were worried about a year ago, we should still be worried about today.
That is certainly a strong statement. What about the FDIC? Reports that their reserves are getting very low. Is this not a good option?
That is very worrisome. The FDIC, of course, is trying to manage these smaller financial institutions who don't get the kind of extraordinary help that we have offered to the behemoths. And they are failing in big numbers. And I don't know if you've looked at the numbers closely, but when they fail, the amount of bad debt on their books, how deep they are in a hole, is at unprecedented levels. They're not just failing, they're failing big.
JP Morgan, Goldman, Morgan Stanley among 10 large banks that actually have repaid TARP. 17% taxpayer profit there. In today's testimony, your panel suggested that other funds may not be recouped. So how much more are we looking at?
I wish I knew. The problem we've got is everyone said, oh, 17% rate of return sounds great, but we have to remember that's for the few richest institutions that made it out of the TARP. They gave us a rate of return, but most of the money is still in there, and some of it we will probably never see. Overall, where we end up, it's just going to depend on what happens over the next several months.
Professor Elizabeth Warren, the chair of the TARP Congressional Oversight Panel, many thanks for your status update on the TARP.